But my name is Michael Hofrichter. I'm one of the onboarders and support specialists for LegalServer. I do a lot of work with our document integrations and our other integrations as well. And so today we're going to talk about the three main integrations that we've got with document service providers, right? So we've got, so before we get started, let's really talk about why would you use one of these in addition to LegalServer, right? I think the big reasons to take a look at a document integration are basically one of three things, right? You want to integrate with other tools. You've got other things that you want to do beyond just store the document, right? LegalServer does great at storing a document and associating it with a case and giving you a directory to put it in. But if you want to do something else, if you want to attach it to emails, if you want to edit it, if you want to share it with outside partners, right? If you want to use OCR to pull out certain text, right? Those are some things that don't always happen within LegalServer. And you may want to take advantage of one of the other tools that we've got, right? So in terms of document integrations, right? The biggest thing is that it's a place for you to store your documents. So right now, LegalServer supports three different document integrations, right? We've got a search feature with Google Drive, and then we've got more traditional integrations with SharePoint and Dropbox. And so we'll go through a comparison of these three different tools. We'll take a look at examples of each one of them. And then I'm happy to answer questions that come up. So, right, in terms of the different features available, right, it's a pretty small slide deck, but here are some of the big differences between our Google Drive, our Dropbox, and our SharePoint integrations, right? I think we all want to be able to view files, right? We want to have this work as a file library, right? So they all work that way. You can view files when you're in the case, you can view the related files without a problem. Then it becomes a question of adding files, right? In this case, Google Drive has sort of been our integration that hasn't had that development recently, but both Dropbox and SharePoint, we've been doing a lot of development for recently. And we've got a couple of different ways that you can add documents to both of those. The first is that we've got a list view that you see on your on the case that you can just drag and drop into, like you can drag and drop into the list view for documents in LegalServer. The second is if you go up to Actions, Add a New Document, right? They both support adding a new document. And unlike when you add a new document into LegalServer, when you add a new document using LegalServer to Dropbox or SharePoint, you get a lot less fields. So instead of having, say, questions about funding code and Office and other details, right? We're not really filling out much of the metadata that's going into Dropbox or SharePoint, so we're not collecting that information. You can also add documents by going to add a case note and saying that you want to upload a document with a case note. That would then directly add it to Dropbox or SharePoint. And the last place that we've got an integration built in is adding it via the templates, right? If you use the document templates, or if you use, if you use the document templates for either a document that you can directly download or a document that you are going to use a process to generate, it'll save those end results to the integration as opposed to just saving them to LegalServer, right? One thing I do want to note is that we've been adding to these features over the last couple months incrementally, just making sure that they work, turning them on, testing them, and going forward with that. So some organizations that started with SharePoint maybe 2 years ago may not be saving those documents directly to SharePoint, right? You might just have the drag and drop features available to you, be using that and not be using these other ways to save documents. Clearly, there's other ways to add documents to LegalServer, right? There's emailing a case, and there's uploading to the add document block, or the add document title block, or the retainer agreement block, right? So all of these other smaller blocks that can still save into LegalServer's documents. And for now, those are still saving to LegalServer, right? So while we would like to get to the point where we could say, look, if you're using SharePoint or if you're using Dropbox, you don't have to worry about LegalServer at all, right? That's not where we are yet with the development of these tools. Doesn't mean that we won't get there eventually, but right now, with any case, you're going to want to have both the LegalServer list or block and the SharePoint or Dropbox block as well. In terms of some other features, right? This is where we've got some distinctions between what we can do in Dropbox and what we can do in SharePoint. In SharePoint, we recently rolled out a new feature for the ability to save to multiple SharePoint sites or libraries, right? So instead of just everything going into the same location, right? We now can you can now pick and choose where it's going on a case-by-case basis. And you can set that up so that it automatically creates the folder and links it based on branch logic or some other lookups that you've got to specify which location to go to then create the folder. And once you do that, right, you can then move that folder from one library to another in SharePoint. You can choose, and once you move it from one library to another, you can then update a field within LegalServer to repoint that library for the case, right? So we do have some ability there. On the other hand, Dropbox has a different setup, right? Unlike SharePoint, Dropbox works a little bit differently. And so one of the things that we were able to do easily in Dropbox that we weren't initially able to do in SharePoint, although we're still looking into it, is to capture a folder ID that was a unique folder ID when we create the folder. And since we're now storing a folder ID for Dropbox, that means that we can rename that folder and move that folder without any other concerns. So that's a different tool that we've got for Dropbox than we do have for SharePoint. So that's just some of the details about what these look like and what the different distinctions are here, right? At some point, we will get back to our Google Drive tools to start expanding those, but we don't have a lot of users of Google Drive integration right now, and so we've concentrated our development on the integrations that definitely have more users and more need of those requests. All right, so let's take a look at Google Drive. So here is an example of the Google Drive list view that we'll see in a moment, right? And so you can see it's giving us a view into your Google Drive team folder that you can then search for the documents. So with Google Drive, it's not there's not a folder in Google Drive that you're using, right? You're using your whole Google Team Drive, and then within there, within the Google Team Drive that you've linked to LegalServer, LegalServer does a search to find the right documents, right? We're searching based on the client name and the case number. So you can see that we've got a couple of different case numbers here, right? This test and this test folder, and those have different numbers, but the client name here that we're looking at is test, and that's why we're seeing test in all of these file names. And if we go into that case, we'd see that I don't even know that either of those file names match the one that we're looking at, right? And so Google Drive has a different structure that we're using, right? Because in our own experiences, when we do a lot of use of Google Drive, right, we're always leveraging the search features. And so that's how we built the integration within LegalServer. Right, and right now we don't have any storing capabilities within Google Drive, right? So if you want to add a new document to Google Drive that's related to this case, right, you just upload it directly to Google Drive. You're not going to go through LegalServer to make that happen. On the other hand, Dropbox, we do have the ability to store files through LegalServer. So the first option is that we can drag and drop into this list view, right? And like I mentioned before, we can rename those files. And otherwise, this is what you're seeing, right? We're seeing a specific folder with those documents within that folder. We can have subfolders, and those subfolders will show up, and we can have files within those subfolders. And then one of the things that we are slowly rolling out is some updates to this to make dragging and dropping into those subfolders a little bit more simpler, and to really make things, to make it a little bit more clear as you're uploading a new file, what's happening, render progress bar, and the like, right? We already have that in SharePoint, and we're rolling those features out to Dropbox as well. In SharePoint, right, we have a similar list view, right? It's basically the same list view that you have from Dropbox, but the difference is that we've got some of those additional features in terms of dragging and dropping a larger file in there. And we do have some warnings about overwriting files and the progress bar that we don't have in Dropbox. So one of the nice things with the Dropbox uploader that we're using is that for Dropbox, right, if you add a file that has a illegal character in the file name, it will automatically rename the file, right? That's not true for SharePoint. For SharePoint, we have to automatically strip out some of those file illegal characters, right? And some of this has changed over time. SharePoint's gotten a little less restrictive with some of the file naming requirements. And so at some point, we'll revisit our restrictions on that to make sure that we're only filtering for the ones that need to be filtered for. But that's still that's a ticket that's on a sprint yet to be sprinted. Right, and like I said, the other benefit in SharePoint is that we can move folders between libraries, right? So the client that we built this out for wanted to have different SharePoint sites for each of their major grants. Right, so they'd have a SharePoint site for the VOCA grant or their LLC grant or their local foundation grant, right? And then within that site, they'd have two libraries. They'd have a library for their open cases and a library for their closed cases. And when the case closes, right, they go into SharePoint, they go to the top bar, they say move folder, they move it from the open library to the closed library. They come back into LegalServer, and they change a lookup value from the open file to the closed file. And then that connection within LegalServer is maintained, but their SharePoint library is more streamlined to just the cases that are still active and open. Right. I do want to make a note, and this is somewhat confusing for a lot of our users, and so we do have active tickets to streamline some of this, is that for both Dropbox and SharePoint, we've got two methods of authentication that we use. Right? So the first is that we use an app authentication that says LegalServer as an app has full rights to your Dropbox and SharePoint site. And so long as someone's dragging and dropping into that list view, it doesn't matter who they are. If they had permission to access that list view, they can go ahead and they've got permission to add that document. Right? And that's for viewing that list of documents and dragging and dropping new documents in there. That's the only places where we use that app authentication. If you were then to click on that list view or to try and open one of those documents, you're going to have to authenticate with SharePoint because you're actually opening it in SharePoint. You're not opening it in LegalServer. The other place where we have some authentication that's happening is when you add a document to templates or notes or upload a document or add a new document to a case. And there we're asking you to authenticate and use the user authentication to say that you are you and you actually do have rights to add to that folder. I know that this has created a little bit of confusion because you've got the right to do it here, you don't have the right to do it here, right? There's also the question about, well, what about, say, pro bono volunteers? Why can't how can they add a document when they add case notes? Or how can they view a document, right? So those are things that really do need to be considered and thought through. And so one of the things that we'll be doing in the next couple of weeks is really trying to make this authentication a little bit more transparent to you as site administrators, and to be able, and something that you're able to set for your organizations, right? To say when you're going to use the app authentication or the user authentication a little bit more granularly, and not just because LegalServer said that was what we were supporting here. So I do want to make a mention of that. And then I think before I get into our future plans, right, let's run through a couple examples, right? So here is our Google Drive integration, right? We can actually see this is the test case that we were looking at before. And you can see that we've got our test, right? This is our basic case that most of you have on your sites. And you can see the files that pulled up here. So if I were to actually open up, right, some of these documents, right, nothing here, it's just an example. The only thing that's linking this file to this case is the fact that the client name is test, and the document says test, right? This is purely a search-based integration, right? And you can see that we can click and go back and forth between the two. And if we wanted, we could actually do some filters here. But this is something that's still pretty unique to Google Drive, right? On the other hand, right, we can come over here to our SharePoint testing site, right? And you can see that we've got multiple folders, right? Actually, on this, here, let me click View All, right? It'll take a few seconds to load. You can see that we now have multiple folders, right? And we show them, and then we show which folder each of these documents is in. And you can see that we've got all of those. I will say, when one of the things that we're working on is speed improvements. We recognize that sometimes our queries can be rather slow. I think the slowest I've seen it has unfortunately been when we've got a case with a lot of documents, right? I think the longest one I saw was a case where in that case folder that you had, there were another 300 subfolders, right? And when we're trying to fetch 300 subfolders and all of the details and document details that are in each one of those, right, this can be a longer API call. And so we are looking into sort of streamlining some of that. And I do want to point out what this looks like when we're testing it, right? So if I wanted to upload a file and do that, I can just upload it. And if you notice here, right, it's uploading and it's uploading in the background. And I don't know if you saw this pop up here, but I got a message saying this file already exists. Do you want to replace it? I can say yes. Right. And then at the bottom here, you can see that the upload, we've got the progress bar, and then it's successfully uploaded. It'll wait 3 seconds, and then the list view automatically refreshes. Right. And if you notice, I dragged it sort of over here, and the whole list view lit up. Right. But if I drag it onto a specific subfolder, right, anywhere in that row, that will upload that file directly to that subfolder. So I'm uploading the same file again, and you'll notice that because there wasn't a file with that name in it, I didn't get that warning before it uploaded, right? And so now I can see that file right here, and this is just a Zoom background from a presentation I gave last year, right? And I can click into any of these, and if you notice, the link that opened up at the top is a SharePoint link, right? It's opening directly there. The other thing to realize is that I can come up here and I can see that I've got a test template on this site, right? And when I'm looking at the templates, it's not automatically giving me that login, right? That ability to pull that file. Instead, it's telling me, hey, you need to click here to log into SharePoint, right? So, and that's an example of that user authentication, right? So if I click that user authentication, right, click here to log into SharePoint, I get a message, do I trust this this authentication app, I can say trust it. It's going to pull me back into LegalServer, the same page that I was at beforehand, right? And now I've got the ability to start the process, right? I can just click Start Process, right? I can pick the document that I want, right? And it's automatically going to do that. I can then say, just generate the document and upload it to SharePoint, right? Again, if I click the link here, it's going to automatically download it for me, right? And I can also click continue and it'll take me back to the profile. And if I scroll down here, right, at some point, I have, right, today is the 9th. All right, so it's going to be test template. One of these. Here it is, 0309-2021, test template 5. I open it up, right, and it automatically filled in my values and it's available for me, right? If I choose to click the folder name or the subfolder name, it's going to open up those folders directly in SharePoint, so I can see those everything that's in SharePoint, right? The columns over here that you can't see are non-standard, so please ignore those, but everything else here is what you would see, right? And if I click the top level of the library, I'm going to have one folder for every case, right? And the folder name is going to be the case number, right? It's not, and unfortunately, I can't rename that, right? If I rename that, it's going to break the connection between LegalServer and SharePoint. On the other hand, one thing that you can do is if you create a folder on that library for a case that is not yet open or a case that has been opened but is not a recent case, right? LegalServer will check and see, oh, there is a folder for this case here. Let me associate it. So you don't need to create the folder from within LegalServer if you already know the case number and just create it within SharePoint, right? Once you're in SharePoint, you can do other things with the document, right? You can share the document, you can edit the document, you can use some other tools within Microsoft to pull additional information, right? So I know that we do have 2 groups that are using the SharePoint integration that are also pulling case-related metadata from some of the LegalServer APIs into SharePoint so that they're populating some of the other details that they might have there. Right, and so those are all features that are available to you to implement and explore. And so that's a lot of how our current SharePoint integration works. Right, the one distinction is that if you're using it on a site where the multiple libraries are configured, right, if I came up here and I go to create an API folder in SharePoint, right, I'm already getting an example that the folder already exists. On a multi-library site, I'd have a lookup here that would let me pick which library I want to save it to. And that's the big distinction there with SharePoint. All right, moving on to Dropbox. So for Dropbox, right, we built this, and a lot of the configurations that happened to the Dropbox integration were based on the configurations we had built for SharePoint. So since they're fairly similar, you can see that the list view looks pretty much the same. If I go ahead and drag and drop into this list view, right, you'll notice that I don't have the opacity changes yet, right? That is coming. I dropped here, and I picked a slightly larger file, so it's taking a moment, right? And then now I get the message that your file has been uploaded to the Dropbox folder. And so that's just something that is coming, right? We do have some of those refinements coming in planned to sort of get the Dropbox list view to marry the features that we've got in the SharePoint list view in terms of the progress bar or the opacity changes, right? And again, if I click the folder here, right, this is taking me to the other, to Dropbox, and I can see the files, right? And if I add a document here, right, and then I come back to Dropbox, to LegalServer, if I refresh this list view, right, and it is connecting, and I scroll down, I can see that test file that I just uploaded was uploaded here, right? And so, because like I said before, with all of these integrations, right, these are like previews into your other integration. They are document previews of what you have in Google Drive, what you have in SharePoint, what you have in Dropbox. It's not, we're not storing a list of, oh, these are all the files in SharePoint, right? Because there's no way that we'd be able to maintain that as a current effective list, right? So it's much easier for us to say, this is what you have at this moment in this other location. The saving documents feature is the same as what we saw in SharePoint. And then the last element that I want to point out in Dropbox, and we'll hope this works, right? I'm in Dropbox. If I remember how to do that, right? We'll go up to our Dropbox demo, right? This is our 29 case. I'm going to rename this folder testing, right? And this is something that would break that folder, the connection in SharePoint. But if I come back here to our demo site and I reload the page, and I scroll down, I can see that that folder is now named testing at the end, right? That connection is still there, even though the folder name is different and the detail, but that connection between the two sites, LegalServer and Dropbox, was maintained because of that unique folder ID. So that's sort of what all three of these look like, right? I'm happy to take some questions, or I'm happy to jump back to talk about what's next with these integrations and what to expect as we go forward.
So right. I have a couple questions. It's Alan Hill.
Sure, Alan.
In Dropbox, does your API create the folder in Dropbox, or do you have to go there and create the original folder?
For both Dropbox and SharePoint, we have a block that you can put in your intake process or in your or on an auxiliary form that is, right, you don't see it here, but if I go to admin edit form, right, this is a Dropbox create folder, right? Same thing for SharePoint. I do know because Dropbox does support that folder renaming, right? For one of the clients that we have it turned on for, we actually do have the folders renamed from the get-go, right? So it's not renamed. So the folder is not just created as the case number, but it's automatically created as the case number dash client name.
There is few questions in the chat too.
All right, so let me run through the chat and then we'll come back to Alan for another question. Right, in terms of the documents that show up in a case in the Google Drive integration, right? So in the Google Drive integration, it's two things. It's either matching, it's searching for the case number, or it's searching for the client name, right? In this case, the test name. And so all of these documents involve test, or it would be searching for the case number. And I don't think any of these documents in the sample have that case number, but that's what it's looking like there.
So sorry, just to confirm, so does that mean you can't decide which documents show up here unless you use the same, it's based off of the naming convention, is that right?
For Google Drive, yes, I believe it's based off of that naming convention, but I don't think it's based on the naming convention of the file. I think it's based on the content of the documents, right? So if you notice, we do have this test doc, right? That doesn't match the client name of test, but if we opened it up, we'd find that name in there.
So, okay, so it could show you a lot of documents that aren't related to the case at all? Potentially,
right? And if we've got another group that wants to go live and has raises some bug tickets, right? We can take a look at what we would need to do there.
Okay.
So can I jump in there again? Because I am a G Suite user. So, you know, when you click on these links here on the Google Drive integration, you're just seeing sort of a view of it in the browser. If you're using Chrome and you have the Google Docs, is that actually editing in Google Docs, or is that just looking at a view?
Well, so here I could request edit access, and I've got, but it's a Google Docs URL, so that I can just open it up and go with it.
So if I have the Google Drive set up so that users, I mean, since we use Google Drive and all our emails Google Drive, everybody has read and write access to the Team Drive or shared Google Drive. You shouldn't have to ask for edit. Is it owned by LegalServer, or is it owned by whoever created the document to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, I think the document's going to be created by whoever opened it up.
Right. So if you already have share permission to wherever the document's located, you ought to be able to just edit it and resave it.
Yeah. So, all right, the next question in chat was about multi-factor authentication. Nope, that's not an issue, because to enable SharePoint, we create a Azure app on your Azure instance, right, that's associated with your SharePoint site. And because of that, it's got, we'll need to set it up with a secure set of credentials, but that is not affected by the multi-factor authentication. When you go to authenticate your individual user, saying that I'm logging into SharePoint, I accept this app, right? I trust it. When you do that and you log into SharePoint to make that happen, you'll have to use your multi-factor authentication to log into SharePoint, but approving the app is not impacted by that. In terms of the next questions about linking a document directly from Google Drive to LegalServer, right? So if I went to this Google Drive folder and created a new document, right, then I'd be able to see that here, right? I don't know, it looks like I don't have access to this library, right? And I think that's just a product of the fact that I haven't explored here and extra access to it yet. But if I added a new document to this Google Team Drive, it would then show up in this list view, right? There isn't a way from within LegalServer to create a Google document for the Google Drive integration right now. So, other questions? All right, so while you're all thinking, and I know you're all hard at work thinking about these questions, let me just talk a little bit about where we're going in the future with some of these integrations. So one of the first things that we're working on right now is getting Dropbox and SharePoint onto equal footing with their features. We're pretty close for most of them, but we're going to pull up some of those details with the opacity and progress bar so that you've got a sense of what's going on as well. Right, we talked about the authentication, choosing between app authentication and user authentication. We'll be adding that in there. So this is something that I tested, and Alex, who's our developer, who's been leading our document integration work for a long time, he's marked the ticket as testing on the current sprint. So you should see this hopefully in the release notes tomorrow. That when you create a template, you now have a yes/no field on that template that says save it as a docx file. And so what'll happen is that once the file will automatically process as an RTF like they normally do, but then you've got the ability to that will automatically convert it from RTF to docx when we save it into SharePoint or Dropbox for you. And so that's a new feature, right? The reason behind that is that if you have ever used an RTF file in SharePoint, it actually doesn't let you edit, but a docx file would let you edit. And we tried turning this feature on a couple months back, but we ran into the issue of the conversion is not perfect, and we know that. And so we were running into some formatting issues. And so rather than make this a global on change for everyone, we're leaving it in your hands to test to make sure that when you do convert it from a RTF file to a docx file, that you're not losing the formatting that you're expecting. And so since this is going to happen automatically in the back end, right, it'll be a seamless transition for your staff if that's a feature that you need, right? We do recognize that there's other ways to move from RTF to docx files, but this is one that we can offer pretty quickly. So one thing that we do want to do is we do want to incorporate some additional ways of adding documents, right? We recognize that there's other blocks to use, right? We'd like to see emails to a case end up in Dropbox and SharePoint, maybe adding in the right, the activities block or the add documents block, so that those are saving to SharePoint and Dropbox. We're not there yet. It's going to be a sort of a one at a time over the next couple months as we get there, right? One of the things that that's been a request that we're working towards and is sorting that list of documents, right? So if you look, when we're looking at this list of documents, it's a completely somewhat random order. It's not sorted by alphabetically. It's not sorted by creation date or modified date. It's just sort of, this is what SharePoint returned to us. So we'll be looking into leveraging some of our features to be able to sort this list and at a minimum display it in an alphanumeric lookup, right? So that you can easily browse for what you're looking for. One of the other things that we'll be doing in the next couple of weeks is making it easier to move files between LegalServer and Dropbox and SharePoint, right? So the idea, and I think we're starting with this one on Dropbox just because of where the tickets are, but right here where we've got this download link, right, we'll add another link next to it that's either going to be a Dropbox logo or a SharePoint logo that will be to say, hey, save this file in LegalServer over to Dropbox or to SharePoint, and to be able to move the documents in that direction pretty seamlessly. We'll do the same with SharePoint, and then once it's working in one direction, we'll start looking into whether we can make it work in the other direction as well. But we also recognize that for, say, older cases, right, that were around before you were starting to use SharePoint or Dropbox, you'd have wanted those to be able to be there first, right? And then one of the big things that we're working on is really taking a look at speed improvements, especially as libraries get bigger and as case folders get more and more documents. We recognize that there is a speed impact on those, and so we'll be taking a look at improving those load times. I just saw another question in the chat about making documents accessible only to the primary advocate, right? That's something that you can certainly do within SharePoint. I know one client talked to me about using some of the API calls to determine who is the primary advocate on the case, and then using that to limit that folder, right? So that is something that you can do. It's something that you probably should work with someone who knows SharePoint pretty well to enable. But we know it's possible. We just haven't done it. And so that's my presentation. I'm happy to sit around and answer more questions, show off more aspects of it. But otherwise, I'm just open to more questions. So for the Google Drive link, it's the case number and the client name. Right. And
yeah, I have a quick question. We're just beginning. We have SharePoint and LegalServer, but our SharePoint has the names of the clients exclusively. There's no reference to a LegalServer case number. I understand from what you've said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that that won't permit integration. That is to say, you have to have the case number.
So what we would recommend is that you create a new library to use with SharePoint, with the LegalServer SharePoint integration, right? That you've got your existing documents and then you create a new folder for the SharePoint integration. And then you can spend some time renaming the existing folders and moving them into the new library for the SharePoint integration. And that's something that will take some time to do that migration, right? It's not going to be an immediate on turn 4. I will say that we have done one client where we migrated their documents during their onboarding process. And rather than saving their documents into LegalServer, we saved them directly into SharePoint for them. It was a little bit more work in setup, but they got us their documents on the Monday of go live. And once we knew that it was working, it was done shortly after that. Right? There wasn't a delay in waiting for their documents.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions, right? I think in terms of organizations looking at this in terms of Dropbox or SharePoint or Google Drive, right? Certainly we've got more features with Dropbox and SharePoint than we do with Google Drive. And so that's where our development's been, but it's really going to be on an individual group basis, right? What are you using now? What do you want to continue using? Right? We're not going to force you into any one place, right? We're trying to offer all of these, and we'll do our best to support you with them. Other questions, right? All right, so updates work, right? So in SharePoint, if you update the file, it's automatically updated within the file is not stored in LegalServer, so it's automatically, so it only needs to be updated in one place. We're not trying to sync the files back and forth. We're just trying to read what's in the other location. So when you update the file in SharePoint, it's automatically updated. If you've got the file in LegalServer and you download it and save it over to SharePoint, right? Then when you downloaded it, that's the last time it was touched on LegalServer. So if you've then updated it 5 times in SharePoint, right, the version in LegalServer document storage will not have changed. Right, I think that was what you were asking. Okay. Other questions? Oh, system updates. Oh, so right now we're committed to maintaining the SharePoint, the Office 365 version of SharePoint integration, and so that's where. So we're not looking to break that. We will not support a SharePoint, a local version of SharePoint that is not being supported. But right now we are maintaining our current plans with SharePoint and Dropbox. And while those are in the cloud, we're working with them. And then there was another question that was started. All right, for Raj's question, right, about drag and drop files to and from Dropbox and the LegalServer document store, right, that's going to be more of a development, right, because one block then has to talk to the other block, and that's always more development. But our sooner solution is going to be putting those buttons on the files in LegalServer, and then the buttons on the files in SharePoint to save them to LegalServer or to save them to Dropbox or SharePoint. That's I think one of those is certainly happening in the next couple sprints, and then we'll start rolling it out as I'm allowed to nominate these tickets onto sprints later this year. So in terms of integrating, right, I think for integrating based on something other than client name and case number for Google Drive, I think that's going to be, at some point, that's going to have to be some development to figure out what's next. Right. And I'm not sure, we haven't really discussed a lot about our Google Drive development in our meetings, because it's sort of been our I don't know, sort of forgotten integration between the three. But we will get back to it at some point. I think we're probably going to get our Dropbox and SharePoint integrations to a more even spot first, and then we'll return to Google Drive. Unless someone wants to talk to us about doing some development there. In terms of electronic case transfers, right now, those are going to, if you're transferring files with them, that's going to save to LegalServer. We haven't gotten to saving those into SharePoint yet, right? That's something that will come in the future. Right. I know there were just a bunch of questions in the chat, and I think I got them. But I'm happy to stick around for more questions, right? Otherwise, I don't need to keep you any longer, right? So if you need to go, feel free. I do want to just call out and thank Alex, who's our developer on this, who's been sort of tirelessly working through tons and tons of SharePoint and Dropbox and other integration questions over the past, I don't know how long. He's been at LegalServer much longer than I have. And so just want to recognize him and thank him for that. And if you do have questions, or if you're interested in turning this on for your organization, right, just feel free to reach out to support, and we'll get back to you with a change order. Thanks, everyone. Yes, for turning on either SharePoint or Dropbox, there are costs involved. I want to say it's $4,500 to enable it. And then Google Drive is a smaller amount, but our support site would have the latest figures for all of those. All right. Well, I'm open to more questions, or feel free to move on, and we'll talk with you all next week. Thanks, everyone.